Snow bit into the ground like broken glass, and the wind carried the smell of iron and smoke across the yard. The brand was already hot when they dragged her forward. Men watched with hard eyes. No one spoke her name. They had decided she did not deserve one. In that old west town, judgment came fast and mercy came slow, if it came at all. She stumbled, barefoot on frozen earth, her dress torn at the hem from days of running. Her hands shook, not only from the cold but from the weight of being alone. The irons hissed near the fire, and the sound cut deeper than the wind. Someone muttered the word thief as if it were truth carved in stone. Others nodded, relieved the blame had landed somewhere far from their own doors. The frontier was built on silence like this. Long stretches of land where a person could vanish and never be missed. Trails forgotten, graves unmarked, stories buried with the dust. She had learned that early. Hunger taught it, loss taught it again. By the time she reached this town, her hope was already thin as paper. She had come looking for work, not trouble. A place to mend clothes, sweep floors, maybe sleep near a warm stove. Instead, she found locked doors and eyes that followed her too closely. When the money went missing from the ranch house, they did not search long. She was new. She was alone. That was enough. The men who held her were not cruel by nature, at least not in their own minds. They believed the frontier demanded hardness. That order required examples. The brand would warn others, they said. It would teach a lesson. In truth, it would only teach fear. At the edge of the yard stood a cowboy who had said nothing yet. He watched from under the brim of his hat, his coat dusted with snow. He was not tall, but he carried himself like someone used to standing his ground. His face showed the lines of long days and longer nights. He had ridden in from the north that morning, following a trail that crossed his land and cut through this town. He had heard the shouts and followed the sound. He had known this place once, back when the river still ran clean and people looked each other in the eye. Now it felt smaller, tighter, like a room with no air. The woman at the table did not look like a thief to him. She looked like someone who had already been punished too much by the world. Behind her, near the barn, a woman with gray hair stood wrapped in black. She had raised children here once before sickness took them. She did not speak, but her hands were clenched so hard her knuckles showed white through the skin. She remembered what it was like to be young and judged without voice. A child peeked from behind a fence post, eyes wide. The boy had learned early to watch and not ask questions. His mother had told him the West could be kind if you worked hard and kept faith. Watching now, he was not so sure. The cowboy stepped closer, boots crunching on snow. He asked what was happening, his voice calm, steady. A man answered that justice was being done. The woman had stolen from the ranch house. Proof enough, they said, was that she had nowhere else to go. The cowboy looked at the table, the iron, the fire. He looked at the woman's face, streaked with dirt and tears she tried not to shed. He saw fear there, yes, but also something else. A quiet resolve, the kind born from surviving too many winters without help. He asked to see the proof. The men frowned. Proof was not needed when the truth felt obvious. Still, someone pointed toward the house behind them, the place where the money had been kept. The cowboy nodded once and said he would take a look. They laughed at first, but there was something in his eyes that made them step back. He walked to the house, each step measured. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with the smell of food and old wood. He noticed things others had missed. A loose board near the stair. Mud on a rug that led not to the door but toward the back rooms. Small signs, but the frontier taught a person to read tracks or be lost. As he searched, memories rose unbidden. His own home quiet now, a wife buried under a cedar tree, a child taken by fever. He had learned that real thieves did not always come from the road. Sometimes they slept under the same roof, smiled at the same table. Outside, the iron was lifted from the fire. The woman squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of her mother's voice, long gone, telling her to hold on to who she was even when the world tried to name her something else. The cowboy returned to the door, something clenched in his hand. The yard fell silent. Snow drifted down, soft and steady, as if the land itself were holding its breath. He looked at the men, then at the woman bound to the table. He opened his palm. In it lay the missing money, tucked inside a pouch stained with grease and ash. He said nothing yet. He only turned his gaze toward the house behind him, toward the shadows where someone else stood watching, suddenly pale. The brand hovered in the air, inches from the woman's skin. The moment stretched thin, trembling between pain and truth. And for the first time since she had been dragged into that yard, the woman felt the weight shift, just enough to let hope breathe. The cowboy did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The pouch in his hand was louder than any shout. For a moment the yard stayed frozen, not only with snow, but with shame that no one wished to name. The man holding the iron glanced at the others, uncertain now. The word thief still hung in the air, but it no longer fit the woman on the table. It turned and looked for a new face to cling to. The cowboy's eyes moved toward the house again, toward the dark shape in the doorway. The ranch house stood with its windows rimmed in frost, its timbers old and weathered. It was the kind of house that promised shelter but kept secrets in its walls. The figure watching from within shifted back as if the shadows could hide guilt. The gray-haired woman in black took one step forward. Her voice came out low, rough from disuse. "Stop," she said, not to the cowboy, but to the men with the brand. "You will stop." The iron paused, trembling in the air. The bound woman opened her eyes. Her breath came in shallow pulls, the cold cutting her throat. She did not dare believe yet. In the West, even truth could be twisted, and mercy could vanish the moment you reached for it. One of the men spat into the snow. "If she ain't the one, then who is?" he muttered, more angry at being wrong than worried about being right. The cowboy held the pouch up where all could see. "This was hid inside the house," he said. "Not dropped in the street. Not lost in the barn, hid." His gaze stayed steady. "That tells you more than a torn dress ever will." Murmurs rose. Eyes darted from the woman on the table to the door of the house. The child behind the fence post leaned forward, curiosity fighting fear. He had seen men in town act sure of themselves before, and he had seen that surety crumble when it met something solid. The cowboy stepped close to the table and nodded at the ropes. "Loose her," he said. A man hesitated, then reached down. His fingers were clumsy with cold and pride. The knots came undone one by one. The woman's arms fell heavy at her sides, numb from strain. She tried to sit up, but her legs buckled. The cowboy caught her by the elbow, not rough, not soft, just steady enough to keep her from crashing into the snow. She flinched at the touch. Her eyes met his for the first time. They were a dark brown, sharp, despite exhaustion. In them was a question she did not speak. "Why did you care?" He did not answer with words. He set his coat over her shoulders, the wool warm from his body. Then he stepped back a pace, giving her air. Respect was rare on the frontier. It was rarer still when the town had already decided you were dirt. The men began to argue among themselves, voices rising. Some wanted to drag the watcher from the doorway out into the yard. Others wanted to pretend they had never been wrong. The gray-haired woman in black stood between them and the table like a fence post set deep in the ground. "Not here," she said. "Not like beasts." That woman's name was Ma Lorne, though most had forgotten she had once been young. She had been the town midwife in years past, the one who held babies before their mothers did. She had also buried those same babies when the fever came through, when the river flooded, when the winter hung on too long. She had seen what the land could take. She had learned to wear black and keep her heart behind it. The cowboy was called Clay Harlan by some, though many spoke his name like a warning. He owned the spread north of town, a hard piece of country with scrub pine and rocky ground. He did not come into town often. Folks said he was a man who kept to himself because he did not trust anyone. Others said he stayed away because the town reminded him of what he had lost. Both were true. Clay's wife had been buried 3 winters ago. A slow sickness, the kind you could not shoot, the kind you could not outride. He had sat beside her bed and promised her the roof would hold, the fire would stay lit, and their boy would grow strong. He had believed those promises when he said them. Then the roof had held, the fire had burned, and his boy had still been taken. Fever does not care about promises. It does not care about a man's hands clenched in prayer. It comes like a thief in the night and leaves the door open behind it. After that, Clay stopped speaking much. He worked his land harder than before, as if sweat could cover sorrow. He rode the fence lines until his horse's sides heaved. He slept with a rifle near the bed, though he did not know what he meant to defend anymore. The woman who had been called a thief stood now with Clay's coat around her shoulders. Her name was Leela, a name she rarely offered because names were another thing the West could steal. She had not been born in a house with good boards and glass windows. She was raised on the edge of a trading trail where wagons passed through twice a month, where hunger was a familiar visitor. Her father had been a quiet man who trapped and traded, and her mother had carried songs from a native camp farther west. Lila did not belong fully to any one place. She had learned to read weather by the smell of the air and to read people by the way their eyes slid away when they spoke. When she was 14, her father rode out one morning and did not return. They found his horse days later, riderless, near a dry wash, no body, no answers, only the empty space where a person should be. Her mother's hair turned gray in a year. The song stopped. Layla promised her mother she would keep them both alive. She did. She worked kitchens, cleaned stables, stitched dresses for women who would not look her in the face. When her mother finally passed, thin as a candle wick, Lila carried her to the edge of a cottonwood grove and buried her alone. She spoke one of the old songs into the dirt so the land would know who it held. After that, she walked the forgotten trails. She drifted from place to place, not because she wished to wander, but because staying meant starving. Towns in the West could smell desperation. They fed it crumbs and then blamed it for being hungry. Now she stood in this yard with half the town staring at her like she was a storm cloud that might return. Her cheeks were flushed from cold and humiliation. Her throat still tasted of smoke. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears were sometimes taken as confession. Clay watched her from a few steps away. Something in him tightened when he saw the marks on her wrists from the ropes. Not anger, exactly, more like the old ache of failing to protect. The kind that woke him at night and left him staring into darkness. The men argued louder. The figure in the doorway finally moved, backing into the house. Someone shouted and ran toward the porch. Another followed. Boots pounded on wood. The door slammed. A window curtain twitched. Clay's hand went to the pouch again, as if holding it kept the truth from slipping away. He glanced at Malorn. "Who's in that house?" he asked. Malorn's mouth tightened. "The ones you let stay," she said. "The ones who smile when you look and steal when you don't." Clay's jaw hardened. He had opened his house months ago to a man named Rusk, a distant kin by marriage, or so the man claimed. Rusk had arrived with a wound on his hand and a story about bad luck. Clay had not asked too many questions. A lonely man is sometimes grateful for company, even the wrong kind. Clay had told himself it was fine, that he could watch his own pockets, that a man deserved one more chance. Now Clay understood how fools are made. Layla stood listening. The name meant nothing to her, but the truth did. The real thief was not a stranger off the trail. The real thief had been warm inside a house while she froze outside it. She felt heat rise in her chest, not only from anger, but from the bitter knowledge that the world always chose the easier target. A gust of wind blew snow across the yard. It stung Layla's face. She pulled Clay's coat tighter, then stopped as if afraid to accept comfort. She took it off and held it out to him. "I don't want your pity," she said, voice rough. "I want my name back." Clay did not take the coat right away. "You never lost it with me," he said. She looked at him, wary. "You don't know me." "No," he said. "But I know what it looks like when folks pick a person to carry their wrongs." That was true, and it struck a place in her she had kept closed. She swallowed hard, eyes flicking away. Trust was dangerous. On the frontier it could cost you your last blanket, your last meal, your life. Behind them, the shouting at the house grew sharper. A crash sounded like a chair knocked over. The townsmen were trying to force the door, but the house had strong boards, and whoever was inside knew how to brace it. Clay's gaze narrowed. "This won't end clean," he murmured. Malorn stepped closer to Layla, her eyes softened, just for a breath. "Come with me," she said. "You're shaking," Lila wanted to refuse. Pride told her to stand alone. Survival told her to accept warmth when it came. She hesitated, then took one step toward Malorn. Clay watched her go, and a strange emptiness opened in him. He had spent years keeping distance from people because closeness meant loss. Yet seeing Lila walk away felt like watching a door close. The child behind the fence post came out at last, a thin boy in a patchwork coat. He stared at Lila with a look that was part fear and part wonder. "Did you steal it?" he blurted, then clapped a hand over his mouth as if he had spoken in church. Lila stopped. She looked at the boy. Her voice softened without meaning to. "No," she said. "But I almost paid for it." The boy's eyes filled with confusion. He did not understand how a person could suffer for something they did not do. He only knew the town had been ready to hurt her. That made something in him shift, a small crack in the lessons adults tried to teach. Clay turned back toward the house. Snow gathered on his hat brim. He heard the shouting, the struggle, the sound of fear turning into fury. He also heard something else, quieter, like a warning in his bones. Whoever had stolen was not just a thief. A thief did not let a woman be branded to protect himself. A thief who could watch that and stay hidden was something colder. Clay felt the weight of his own choices pressing down. He had let a stranger into his home. He had ignored signs because he was tired of being alone. Now that same loneliness had nearly destroyed an innocent woman. Across the yard, Lila followed Malorn toward the small back room of the clinic where a stove burned. Her steps were slow. Pain from the rope marks and the cold made her limbs heavy. Yet the deeper ache was inside, where humiliation lived. She did not know what would come next. A town's shame could turn to anger quick. A man accused might run. A man cornered might do worse. And even if the truth came out, the brand they had wanted to press into her skin would linger in their minds. Inside the clinic, Malorn sat Lila near the stove. The warmth hit her like a wave, and she nearly cried from it. Malorn handed her a tin cup of hot water with a pinch of herbs. Layla took it with trembling hands. "You got a place to go?" Malorn asked quietly. Layla stared into the cup. "No," she said. "Not anymore." Malorn nodded as if she already knew. She looked toward the window where the ranch house stood, half hidden by snow and smoke. "Then you best be careful," she said, "because this town don't forget easy. And the man you shamed without meaning to is the kind who will want revenge." Lila's throat tightened. "I didn't shame him," she whispered. "He did it to himself." Malorn's eyes held hers, grave and steady. "Maybe, but men don't always see it that way." Outside, the crash of breaking wood finally echoed. A shout rose, sharp with victory or panic, it was hard to tell which. Then a new sound followed, a horse's frantic whinny and the pounding of hooves on frozen ground. Clay stepped into the snow-choked street, scanning the yard, the porch, the open gate. He saw movement at the far fence line. A figure running, hunched low, heading toward the stable where fresh horses were kept. Clay's hand tightened at his side. He started forward, heart hammering with more than anger. His own house had hidden the real thief, and now that thief was slipping into the storm. In the clinic, Layla heard the hooves too. She looked up, eyes wide. The warmth of the stove could not reach the cold truth creeping in. This was not over. Not by a long trail. The stable gate slammed in the wind, and the sound carried like a gunshot through the snow. Clay broke into a hard run, boots slipping on the frozen ground. He did not shout. A shout would warn the man. Clay had learned long ago that the land listened, and so did those who meant harm. Near the stable, a lantern swung from a hook, casting uneven light across the yard. In that glow, the fleeing figure looked like a shadow given legs. The man yanked open a stall door and fumbled at a bridle, hands shaking with haste. A horse stamped, nervous, steam rising from its nostrils. Clay slowed at the corner of the barn, pressing his shoulder against rough wood. He watched the man's movements, quick and practiced. Not a drifter then, not truly. This was someone who had handled horses before, someone who knew how to steal without leaving too much behind. Clay's chest tightened with a bitter kind of knowing. He had let that man sit at his table. He had let him talk by the fire while the night wind scraped the windows. Clay had even felt a foolish comfort in having another heartbeat in the house. Now that comfort turned to poison. Inside the clinic, Malorn moved with careful calm, as if calm were a tool she could hold against trouble. She closed the curtain and kept her voice low. "Stay here," she told Lila. "Let the men chase their own storm." Lila rose anyway, legs still unsteady. The warmth from the stove had returned feeling to her hands, but it also brought the ache of everything that had happened. If he runs, Lila said, they'll blame me again. They will say I was part of it. They will say he fled because I lied. Malorn studied her face. You got a stubborn soul? It's how I'm still breathing. Malorn's expression softened a fraction, then hardened again. Breathing ain't the same as living, she said. And living takes more than stubbornness. Lila did not answer. She looked toward the window. Snow drifted in thick sheets now, blurring the yard like a white veil. Through that veil she saw movement, men rushing, lanterns bobbing, someone yelling for a rope. She saw Clay's shape too, cutting through it all with purpose. A strange pull settled in her chest. She did not like needing anyone. Need had brought her pain more times than she could count. Yet the sight of Clay moving toward danger for the sake of truth stirred something she had not felt in years. She wrapped her arms around herself. Her thoughts went back to her mother's words, spoken in a tongue the town would never understand. The words had meant, do not give your heart to people who only borrow it. They will return it broken. Still, Layla stepped toward the door. Malorn caught her wrist. Her grip was not cruel, just firm. You go out there, she warned. You'll be seen. And if trouble turns, it will turn toward you. Lila's eyes flashed. I'm already seen. Malorn held her gaze a long moment, then released her with a heavy sigh. Then go careful, she said. And keep your head. Men in shame do foolish things. Outside, Clay reached the open stall just as the thief swung into the saddle. The horse lunged forward, hooves striking sparks off frozen stones. Clay grabbed the reins, yanking hard. The horse reared, and Clay's shoulder jolted as pain shot down his arm. He held on anyway. The thief leaned low, trying to kick free, eyes wild. Let go, the man snarled. Clay's voice came out like gravel. You hid in my home, he said. You let them nearly mark an innocent woman. You don't ride away clean. The man's face twisted. In the lantern light, Clay saw it clearly now. Rusk, the man who had called him cousin. The man who had spoken of faith and misfortune with a soft voice and sad eyes. Those eyes were hard now, stripped of their story. Rusk jerked the reins, trying to wrench free. Clay stepped closer, forcing the horse against the stall doorway so it could not bolt straight. Why? Clay demanded low. Why her? Rusk's laugh was short and ugly. Because she was there, he spat. Because the town needed someone. Same as you did. The words hit Clay harder than the horse's hooves. Because you needed someone. Clay's grip tightened until his fingers burned. He hated that there was truth in it. He had wanted company so badly he had ignored the smell of rot beneath it. A shout rose behind Clay. Townsmen came running, faces red with cold and fury. Someone held a rope, another held a lantern high. Their anger was not only for theft, it was for their own mistake. People did not like to look at their cruelty. They preferred to chase someone else. Rusk saw them coming and panicked. He yanked his boot free and swung it toward Clay's hand. Clay dodged, but the movement loosened his grip. The horse surged. For a breath, it felt like the animal might pull away. Then a voice cut through the storm. Stop! Lila stood a short distance away, hair loose around her face, Clay's coat still hanging from her shoulders like a borrowed shield. Snow clung to her lashes. She looked small against the yard and the men, yet her voice carried. Not loud, certain. Rusk's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowed. In that instant, Clay felt something shift, like a blade turning in the dark. He saw it in Rusk's posture, in the way his hand moved toward his belt. Clay moved without thinking. He stepped between them, body angled to block Lila from view. Get back, he said, not looking at her, voice tight. Lila did not move. She stared at Rusk, her face pale but steady. You let them call me a thief, she said. You watched. Rusk's mouth curled. You should have kept walking, he replied. But you came sniffing near the pantry like a hungry dog. Folks see that and they make up their own truth. Layla's hands clenched at her sides. I came to work, she said. I came to live, Rusk scoffed. Ain't much living for your kind. The words were quiet, but they landed like a slap. Layla's mother's blood and her father's hardships lived in her face and her skin. This town had been reading her wrong from the moment she arrived. Clay felt anger rise, hot in his ribs. He wanted to strike Rusk, to knock that smugness clean off his face. But he also heard Malorn's warning in his mind. Men in shame do foolish things, and shame was thick in this yard now. The townsmen reached them. One grabbed at the horse, another grabbed Rusk's arm. Rusk fought like a cornered animal, kicking and twisting. The horse squealed and stomped. Someone shouted for Clay to step aside. Clay did not. His gaze stayed on Rusk, but he was thinking of Lila behind him. The fragile line between justice and cruelty. One step and the mob could turn. It had already turned once today. Malorn arrived at the edge of the yard, breath visible in the cold. She looked from the rope in one man's hand to the hate in another man's eyes. She had seen this before. Not this story, but this kind of turning. A town that thought punishment could wash away its own guilt. "Enough," she snapped. Her voice carried the weight of every baby she had delivered and every body she had laid out. "You want to fix your wrong, then fix it right." "Not with more wrong," a man shouted back. "He stole from Clay. He lied to all of us. And you near burned a mark into a woman's skin," Malorn replied, eyes sharp. "So do you want to call that justice too?" Silence fell for a heartbeat. In that silence, Clay heard Lila breathing behind him, fast and thin. He turned slightly and saw her face. She looked like she might collapse or fight, he could not tell which. Her eyes were full of old pain and new fear, and underneath it, something like hope that she did not want to admit. Clay stepped toward her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Go back to the clinic," he said. "Please." The word please sounded strange from him, like a piece of softness he had forgotten how to use. It surprised him, and it surprised her too. She blinked, thrown off balance by it. "You don't get to tell me where to stand," she whispered. He met her gaze. "No," he said, "but I can ask. And I'm asking because I don't trust what comes next." Her throat tightened. She looked past him at the men pulling Rusk down from the saddle, at the rope, at the fury. She understood what Clay meant. The danger was not only Rusk. It was the town's hunger to prove it could still be righteous. She nodded once, small. Then she hesitated, and the hesitation felt like a question. A question about Clay, about why he was doing this, about whether he would leave her behind the moment the storm settled. Clay felt that question without her speaking it. He did not know how to answer. He had lived too long with loss to make promises. Promises were things the West took and mocked. Yet he could not bear the idea of her walking away with only shame and cold to keep her company. Layla turned back toward the clinic, steps slow, as if each one pulled against an invisible thread. Clay watched her go, and the thread pulled at him too. Behind him, Rusk was dragged into the snow, pinned by 3 men. He twisted his head, eyes flicking toward Clay with something like triumph, as if even caught he could still wound. "You think you're better than me?" Rusk hissed. "You think you can save her and wash your hands. But you're the one who brought me in. You're the one who set this fire." Clay's jaw clenched. The words burned because they were half true. Clay had opened the door. Clay had welcomed the snake. The townsmen hauled Rusk toward the jailhouse, shouting for the sheriff. The rope stayed in one man's hand. It did not touch Rusk yet, but it was there, a quiet threat. Clay followed, not because he cared for Rusk's comfort, but because he cared for what the town might do in its rage. As they moved through the street, the boy in the patchwork coat ran alongside, eyes wide. He looked up at Clay as if Clay were the only steady post in a shifting world. "Is she going to be all right?" the boy asked. Clay did not answer at once. Snow fell thicker. The storm was closing in, swallowing tracks as soon as they were made. He thought of Lila in the clinic, sitting near a stove but still cold inside. He thought of the brand, still hot by the fire, still waiting for someone to use it again, if anger won. "I don't know," Clay admitted finally. "But I aim to try." The boy nodded, as if that was the best truth a person could offer in a place like this. At the clinic door, Lila paused and looked back. Clay was a dark shape in the storm, moving toward the jailhouse with the crowd. For a moment she felt something she had tried to bury, something dangerous, a longing to believe in someone. She pushed it down because longing was how hearts got broken. But as she stepped inside and closed the door against the wind, she could not stop the thought that followed her like a quiet shadow. If Clay failed, the town would turn on her again. And if Clay succeeded, she did not know what that would mean for the wall she had built around her own life. Outside, the lantern swung and the storm tightened its grip, and the outcome remained uncertain, hanging over the old west town like smoke that would not clear. The storm thickened as night came on, and the town shrank into a handful of lantern lights fighting the snow. Wind slid between buildings like a cold hand, prying at doors and rattling shutters. Tracks vanished as soon as they were made. In weather like this, a person could disappear 5 steps from the street and be swallowed whole. Clay stayed near the jailhouse, watching the men who had dragged Rusk in. Their anger had not cooled. It had only found a new place to burn. They packed the porch and the street, stamping their boots, talking in sharp whispers. The sheriff was a tired man with a belly and a bad cough. He kept looking at the crowd like he feared them more than the prisoner. Inside, Rusk sat behind iron bars, hands bound, his face bruised from the struggle, yet his eyes still gleamed with a stubborn kind of pride. He leaned forward as Clay approached the cell. "You came to watch," Rusk said, voice smooth again like he could slip into any shape he wanted. "Or you came to beg them to spare me." Clay did not flinch. "I came to make sure they don't turn into beasts," he said. Rusk chuckled. "They already were. You just didn't see it until it reached your doorstep." Clay's fists tightened. A memory rose, unwanted. His wife's face by lamplight, soft with trust. His boy laughing in the yard, cheeks red from cold. Clay had believed his home was a place where harm could not enter unless invited. Now he saw how wrong that had been. "You took from me," Clay said low. "And you tried to take from her." Rusk's smile thinned. "I didn't try," he replied. "They did that all on their own. I only gave them a story that fit their hunger." Clay stared at him through the bars. "Why?" he asked again, because the question was a thorn he could not stop pressing. "Why come to my house?" Rusk's gaze sharpened. "Because you were easy," he said. "A widower with a quiet home and a soft spot you pretend ain't there. You think pain makes you hard. It don't. It makes you lonely. Lonely men open doors they shouldn't." The words landed deep, right where Clay kept his grief buried. Clay's throat tightened, and for a breath he could not speak. He hated Rusk for saying it, and hated himself more for knowing it was true. Outside the jailhouse, a shout rose. Not anger this time, but alarm. Men turned, boots scraped on the porch. The sheriff stepped out, eyes wide, and asked what was happening. A boy's voice cut through the wind, high with panic. "Fire!" the boy yelled. "There's fire at the clinic." Clay's blood turned cold. He pushed past the sheriff and down the steps, snow blowing into his face. He did not hear the questions behind him. He only heard the word fire, and in his mind it joined another memory, older, sharper, the smell of sickness in his home, his wife's weak hand in his, the helpless feeling of watching something precious slip away while the world stayed indifferent. He ran. Across town, Malorn stood in the clinic doorway, the lantern light behind her making her look like a black shape cut from night. Smoke curled from the roofline. Not thick yet, but enough to taste. The wind fed it, snapping and pulling like it wanted flames to spread. Inside, Lila had been helping Malorn bandage her wrists and warm her feet. She had been trying to sit still, trying to calm the shaking in her chest. But when the first smell of smoke drifted through the room, her body moved before her mind did. Fear like that did not ask permission. Ma Lorne had grabbed a bucket and splashed water at the back wall where the stovepipe ran through, but the old boards were dry. Too dry. A spark could turn into a blaze in minutes. "We need to get out," Ma Lorne said, coughing as smoke thickened. Leela's eyes darted toward the small back room where Ma Lorne kept supplies, medicine, blankets, the little things people needed to survive winter. If the clinic burned, the town would lose more than a building. It would lose its last thin layer of care. And Leela knew with a sinking certainty what people would say. They will blame me. Even if she stood outside in the snow and watched it burn, they would say the thief girl said it. They would twist it until it fit their hunger again. Leela's hands clenched. "It's the stovepipe," she said, voice tight. "The wind must have pushed smoke back through the wall." Malorn shook her head. "No," she said. "I smelled oil." Someone poured oil. Leela froze. Oil meant choice. It meant this was no accident. Her heart hammered hard enough to hurt. She thought of Rusk's eyes in the stable, the way they had slid to her like a knife. She thought of the rope still in a man's hand outside the jailhouse. She thought of how easily a town could be led. Malorn grabbed Lila's arm. "We leave now," she insisted. "You ain't dying in here for their peace." Lila pulled free, not harsh, but desperate. "If we leave, they'll say I did it," she whispered. "They'll say I tried to cover my tracks." Malorn's face tightened with sorrow and fury. "Then let them talk," she said. Living is more important than being believed, but Lila could not move. She stared at the back room. She could picture the jars of salve, the cloth strips, the dried herbs. She could picture Malorn's hands working by lamplight, saving people who would never thank her. If the clinic burned, Malorn would be left with nothing but ashes, and the town's anger would have a new shape. Lila reached for a wet blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I'm going in," she said. Malorn grabbed her again, stronger this time. "No," she snapped. "You don't owe them a sacrifice." Layla's eyes filled, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not doing it for them," she said. "I'm doing it because I'm tired of running. I'm tired of watching good things burn because men like him keep hiding behind other people's suffering." Malorn looked at her, and for a moment her hard face cracked. She saw not a stranger, but a younger version of herself. A woman trying to hold the world together with bare hands. "Then I go too," Malorn said, grabbing another wet cloth. They moved into the back room together, smoke biting at their throats. The air was hotter there, and the boards along the wall felt warm to the touch. Flames licked low in the corner where oil had soaked into the wood, sneaking like a living thing. The fire did not roar yet, it whispered, greedy. Layla dropped to her knees and began dragging jars and cloth bundles into a crate. Her fingers fumbled, slick with water and shaking. Malorn coughed and cursed and shoved bundles toward the door. Outside, people gathered, drawn by the smell and the glow. Some shouted for water. Others stood watching, stunned, as if they could not believe trouble had found them again so soon. In the crowd, suspicion began to rise like smoke. "She was in there," someone muttered. "That girl?" Another voice answered, sharper. "A thief will burn the world to hide her hands." Clay reached the edge of the crowd, breath ragged, snow melting on his cheeks. He saw smoke pouring from the clinic roof and felt his chest seize. He pushed through men like a man possessed. "Where is she?" he demanded. Malorn's neighbor pointed with a trembling hand. "Inside?" he said. Malorn too. Clay's heart dropped. Without thinking, he grabbed a wet coat from someone's shoulders, soaked it in a bucket, and threw it over his head. He rushed toward the door. A man caught his arm. "Don't," the man warned. "You'll die in there," Clay yanked free. "I already did," he said, and shoved inside. Heat hit him like a wall. Smoke filled his mouth and eyes. He forced himself forward, calling Lila's name for the first time. It came out rough, like a confession. "Layla," he shouted. In the back room, Layla heard him and froze. For a heartbeat, she saw Clay's face in her mind, the steady way he looked at her, the strange kindness in his voice. She thought, he should not be here, he owes me nothing. Then the ceiling groaned above them. A crack sounded, sharp and final, and a burning beam dropped from the rafters, slamming down between the door and the back room. Flames flared up, blocking the way out. Malorn stumbled back, eyes wide with fear she could not hide. "We're trapped," she coughed. Leela's breath caught. Smoke thickened, turning the air heavy. Her lungs burned. The crate of supplies sat half full beside her, suddenly meaningless against the roaring truth. On the other side of the fallen beam, Clay's shape appeared through smoke, coat over his head, eyes red and wild. He took one step forward, then another, and the fire leaped higher, daring him to come closer. "Stay back!" Lila screamed, voice cracking. "You can't." Clay shook his head, coughing hard. He tore the wet coat from his head and flung it over the burning beam, trying to smother the flames. For a second it worked, steam hissing. Then the wind sucked through a broken window, and the fire surged again. Clay looked at Lila through the smoke, and in his eyes she saw what he feared most. Not death, loss, the same loss that had hollowed him out before. And in that moment, with the roof groaning and the fire climbing and the town watching from outside, Lila understood the cruel choice the frontier was forcing on them. If she ran toward him, she might not make it. If she stayed back, he would try anyway and might never come out. The beam crackled, flames snapping, smoke pressing down like a hand. Clay reached toward her, palm open, fingers trembling. "Come," he rasped. Lila took one step forward, then another, the heat searing her skin, her eyes watering so badly she could barely see. Above them, the ceiling gave a long, awful groan, like the building itself was about to surrender. And then the main roof beam snapped loose, dropping straight toward the space where Lila stood, as Clay lunged forward with a hoarse cry, trying to reach her before it fell. The beam struck the ground with a crack that shook the room, sending sparks and ash into the air. Layla screamed as heat rushed past her face, and Clay felt a sharp pain tear through his shoulder as he shoved forward, catching her just as she stumbled. Smoke swallowed them both. For a breathless moment there was only fire, coughing, and the sound of wood breaking apart. Clay wrapped his arms around Lila and turned, shielding her with his body as another part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. He did not think. He only moved, driven by the same stubborn force that had carried him through loss and long winters. He dragged her forward, boots slipping, lungs burning, toward a gap where the fire thinned. Malorn followed close, her coat singed, her breath ragged but her steps determined. Together they pushed through the smoke and burst out into the snow, collapsing hard onto the frozen ground as townsfolk rushed forward with blankets and buckets. Cold hit them like mercy. Layla lay gasping, her chest heaving, snow melting against her burning skin. Clay rolled onto his side beside her, coughing until his ribs ached. Someone poured water on the flames behind them. Someone else shouted orders. The fire still raged inside the clinic, but the worst of it had been cut off from spreading. Clay turned his head and looked at Lila. Her face was smeared with soot, hair singed at the ends, eyes red and streaming. She was alive. For the first time since his wife died, Clay felt something in his chest loosen. "You're stubborn," he rasped. Layla laughed weakly, the sound breaking into a cough. "You're not exactly easy to stop?" Malorn sank down beside them, exhausted but breathing. She looked at the two of them, then toward the burning clinic. "We'll rebuild," she said hoarsely. "It ain't the first time." Men stood around them in silence now. The anger that had driven them earlier had drained away, leaving behind unease and shame. They had seen Lila run into fire to save what little the town had. They had seen Clay risk his life without hesitation. The story they had told themselves no longer fit. The sheriff cleared his throat. "We found oil behind the clinic," he said. "Same oil Rusk kept in your barn, Clay, and he admitted it." That drew murmurs, heads turned, eyes lowered. Rusk was brought out from the jailhouse later, hands bound tighter now, his face stripped of pride. The fire had done what anger could not. It had exposed him fully. He was led away under guard, bound for a harder place than this small town. No rope followed him this time. Justice, at last, had chosen a steadier path. In the days that followed, the storm passed. Snow settled clean and bright across the land, covering scars with quiet. The clinic stood blackened but not gone. Men came with tools. Women came with food. The boy in the patchwork coat carried boards twice his size, proud as if he were rebuilding the whole town himself. Layla stayed. At first people did not know how to speak to her. Some avoided her, others offered awkward kindness. She accepted what was offered and ignored the rest. She helped Malorn sort what had been saved, her hands steady now, her back straight. Clay watched from a distance at first. He did not trust happiness. It felt like something borrowed that could be taken back without warning. Yet every morning he found himself walking past the clinic, checking the roofline, listening for her voice. One afternoon Lila found him mending a fence near the edge of town. The land there sloped toward open country, the forgotten trails winding away into hills and sky. "You don't come inside much," she said. Clay leaned on the post, studying her face. The burns on her hands were healing. Her eyes still carried shadows, but there was light there too now. "Didn't think you wanted company?" he said. She considered that, then shook her head. "I'm tired of being alone," she said simply. The honesty of it struck him harder than fire ever had. He nodded once. "So am I." They did not rush what came next. The West taught patience whether you wanted it or not. They walked together sometimes, spoke in short pieces that slowly grew longer. Clay told her about his wife, about his boy, the promises he had made and lost. Layla told him about her parents, about the songs her mother sang, about walking trails with no end in sight. They did not try to fix each other, they only listened. When spring came, the snow melted into soft ground and green shoots pushed through the earth. Clay asked Layla to ride out to his place, not as an offer, not as a demand, but as an invitation. "You don't owe me anything," he said, "but there's room there. And quiet. And work if you want it." Layla looked out toward the open land. She had walked so long with nowhere to land. The idea of staying frightened her almost as much as it warmed her. "I won't be hidden," she said. He met her gaze. "I wouldn't ask you to be," so she went. Life on Clay's spread was not easy. Fences broke. Storms came. Loneliness still crept in on quiet nights. But there was laughter too, slow and surprising. There were shared meals, shared work, shared silence that did not feel empty. The town changed, not all at once, but enough. Children waved when Layla rode in. Malorn visited often, bringing news and scolding them both for not eating enough. The boy in the patchwork coat came by to help and left with pockets full of biscuits and stories to tell. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land gold, Clay and Lila stood by the fence and watched the horizon. The air smelled of earth and promise. "I used to think surviving was enough," Lila said quietly. Clay nodded. "I did too," she turned to him. "Now, I think living might be worth the risk." He took her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. "Not tight, not afraid. We'll risk it together," he said. The land stretched wide before them, scarred and beautiful. The past did not vanish, it never did. But it loosened its grip, leaving space for something new. And in that quiet space between hardship and hope, two wounded souls found a place to stand, no longer alone, facing the open west side by side.